Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Truth Mongers. I am Ted Davies.
And I'm Glenn Fleming.
Cool. I'm an artist, an author, and broadcaster. What about you, Glenn?
Same. I'm an English writer, artist, cartoonist, and publisher, and I've written and published books on lots of different subjects, such as JFK assassination, a couple of science fiction novels, World Cup soccer, children's books, and interestingly, for tonight, I wrote a book about the NASA astronauts who didn't go to the moon, but not because the moon's fake, because they
Right.
died. They died. I'm laughing. They died in training, so that's a bit of a
Right.
coincidence there. And
No,
I've also written other books on various things.
that's good. Well, I mean, that's the part of this whole thing. We're just talking to get a common sense viewpoint on a conspiracy idea that was out there. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about the whole, your side of it, and that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about it, because you've got such a vast capacity. You've done so much work studying and talking to these, just everybody, trying to get the stories together and everybody's histories of what happened with these other astronauts, and that we might not know their names. And that's important because we need to remember, the sacrifices that they made too. Okay, so first off, before we get started and we talk about our sponsors, let's talk about the Rising Tide Broadcast Network, who we're affiliated with. Check out everything that we're doing on the Rising Tide Broadcast Network. We're a group of creatives that help creatives build their businesses, so 7 days a week. So check out everything that we're doing. We are live, our first show today on Wednesday. We are the Truth Mongers, and we're just going to look at a common sense viewpoint on conspiracies. Tonight is going to be about moon mysteries, both the man in the moon and the men that were part of the moon race, I guess, maybe the race towards the moon or whatever. We'll talk about a little bit more about that. Glenn lived back then. I wasn't around quite then. I kind of the end of it. So I want to hear a little bit more of the man on the ground, so to speak. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But check out everything that we're doing on Rising Tide Broadcast Network. We got a full gamut of entertainment and education 7 days a week. So check out everything that we're doing. Take a snapshot of this and follow everybody on the YouTube channels. Okay, so we got that done. Let's talk a little bit about my sponsor. We got big news, or our sponsor, or we got big news this week. We've got a brand new name and a brand new blend in the coffee cup today. Indian River Roasting Company was kind enough to do a Ted Davies Artistry blend, and we are calling it, ready for it? Waking Dragon.
Wow.
Yes, it's an awesome, really, really full-bodied dark roast coffee. You don't drink coffee, Glenn, so you can just giggle all you want. I'll mute you. It is full-bodied. It tastes really, really good with cigars. It's a really good blending coffee with cigars. So, and you can purchase it on Indian River Roasting Company, or email me and we'll get you some of it. So Wake and Dragon, it's the newest one from Indian River Roasting Company, but we are going to show their promo real quick. Give me 1 second because we have to pay the bills, so to speak. As soon as I find the commercial, give me a second. Okay, here we go. Here at Ted Davies Artistry, we take coffee seriously. And so does our sponsor, Indian River Roasting Company. It's fair trade, organic, and they're artisans just like me. The only difference is I use watercolor and ink and they use coffee beans. And I enjoy it all through my day. So do yourself a favor, go to the description when you like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Find Indian River Roasting Company's website. Use the promo code CAFFEINATED2021 and save 10% on your purchase. Yeah, so check everything else out on Indian River Roasting Company's website under the description, IndianRiverRoasting.com. And they will, if you use CaffeinateTed2021 as a promo code, they'll save 10% for you on the purchase. So that'll help you a little bit. We also have another great sponsor, Cashman's Comics in Bay City. They've been there 25 years. And Glenn and I, we've been fortunate enough to, John wanted to be part of this advertising too. So let's see what they're doing. They're having a huge sale right now. I don't know how long it is on for, but I know that he's running it because of the 25-year anniversary. Be right back.
something to believe. Every night the dreams we make, they're haunting my head now.
Yeah, so check everything else out that John is doing. Say hi to Petey the dog when you get down to the comic book store. Tell him that TED Talk sent you, or the Truth Mongers sent you, even better. And yeah, should be good. So I know it's the long-winded intro, but thanks, Glenn. Sorry, got to pay the bills. But
It's all right, no worries.
I want to welcome everybody too. You can see all the comments there too, right, Glenn? You can see all the comments. Good. Yeah, I want to say hi to everybody. Looks like we're global, Glenn. Besides Britain, we're in Canada too. Willow's here too. I hope you're feeling better, Willow. Dan, everybody, Carl, Brian, you name it, the whole gamut is all here. So all our conspirators are here. So that's good. Amy, everybody.
All the usual suspects.
That's right. That's right. Well, and I'm sure that they're going to be sharing this out and liking it. So, well, let's get the format how we want to do this, because you're going to be kind of the direction of what normal people think. I'm going to be kind of the direction of like the conspiracy side of it, and then we can. So I think you should probably start out at the beginning of the race. You know, what happened? I mean, what was this all about? And tell me about your books and
the race.
Yeah.
Well, what we should remember is that the Americans, we only went to the moon to beat the Russians. Simple as that. The psyche at the time couldn't allow the Soviets to get there. They beat America with Sputnik.
Yeah.
Then they beat them putting Gagarin in space and all that kind of thing. And the Americans couldn't cope with that, and that's why Kennedy was such an innovative and brave man.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from being a bit reckless, as he found out a
Sure.
few years later,
Sure.
and other things. But Kennedy was being hounded by the military and everything, and everybody was in Congress and all this, so wondering about this so-called space race. Well, didn't exist at that time, and why the Americans were so far behind. So Kennedy just threw, what was it, $25 billion at it, and he wasn't. I get the impression he wasn't a guy for the detail. Somebody said to him, "We should do something monumental," and he said, "What's monumental? You know, what you're thinking of?" And he said, the guy says, putting a man on the moon. And he said, "How much will it take? You know, what will it cost?" And he said, "Well, $25 billion." And he said, "Okay." And that's when he made that famous speech in 1961. And at that time, I think that was on May something 1961, the Americans had only put Shepard up, suborbital flight, 15 minutes, 5 minutes in actual space. And the Russians had sent up Gagarin and a couple of other guys together and all this kind of thing. So the Americans were way, way behind. But it was what people forget, and people say to me that it was such a waste of money going to the moon. But what they don't seem to consider, that at exactly the same time as those guys were flying Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo and reaching the moon, you know, America was locked in war in Vietnam,
mm-hmm.
which cost $300 billion, and 50,000 lives, well, American lives, and do you see what I mean? People seem to lose the point. To me, it seems money better spent going to the moon than it does killing 1 million people and losing a war for, you know.
Well, yeah, and I think that, I mean, the industrial complex was there. The army, we've gone through 2 world wars, right? And I think that he probably, what's that?
One and a bit.
Yeah, and then
you only came in 3 days from the end, didn't you?
Yeah, right. But I think that probably Kennedy was thinking that you could probably unite the world, not just with the civil rights movement. Because this is during the beginning of this. Yeah. I mean, you could unite the world by setting up a goal of the moon. I mean, it made sense. It would make sense. That made a lot of sense to me.
But I think that kind of thing is I think they went just to beat the Russians. That's what it was about. Because when they got there, there were 6 missions that landed. Excuse me, and 4 were cancelled. But the reason they carried on going after Apollo 11 was because it was already in progress. The hardware was there, all the crews were trained. So they had to, you know, the momentum was there. And that's why they kept going. Because I think that if they could have stopped it after Apollo 11, they would have done. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
But I remember when I spoke with Charlie Duke, who walked on the moon on Apollo 16, and he's the youngest man to walk on the moon. I think he was 36. He was 36 when he walked on the moon in 1972. And he told me that if the impetus would have been maintained and the money would have been there, he told me that he was very, very confident that he would have been on Mars in 1985. That's how confident he was, and they all were. It's just a matter of money, and that's the political will side of it. That's why they've not been back for 50 years, because the political will isn't there. If something happened, which is, if you can prove this with China, you know, you're going to talk about China.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're on the moon. We don't know what they're doing there. They've just landed on the dark side of the moon. And America seems to be waking up again with its space program, but the ironic thing is that the Americans don't have a launch vehicle. 50 years after Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, America, the United States, can't put somebody in space with their own vehicle. They go up in a Russian vehicle.
Well, I mean, you know, I got to argue that we just don't know about it.
Oh,
They've got technology that's 50 to 100 years in the future. They've got to have it. The military, they've got to have it. I would be shocked if they don't. And I'm just saying that from a standpoint of we're common sense, both of us. You know that they've got to have some type of.
Well, yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I would be shocked if they didn't have as well. But I'm just saying from what we see.
Yeah, from what we're told and every. Yeah.
Because I put this in my book. It's ironic that 50 years after Armstrong walked on the moon, like I say, the Americans haven't got their own vehicle to get a man into orbit. Yeah, and the country that put the first man in space doesn't exist.
The richest country on Earth, who doesn't have medical insurance for their people, and doesn't have, right.
But don't forget though, India, India have got a nuclear program and a space program, and Britain doesn't have either. Doesn't have a space program.
And now China's got this while they've landed on the moon. So, and that's great. I think that it's just going to advance us real quick. So I might interrupt, but I want to post this up for what Brian was talking about. Brian said, if they'd kept up the moon landings, we'd have jet cars by Y2K. I'm sure I feel cheated. And then Carl also says, like, Velcro was invented in space. It's simple, but look how many things have come out of the space race.
That's not entirely true.
What?
Velcro wasn't invented for the space program. What? No, let me tell you, it's true. This is true.
Go ahead.
It's the same with non-stick frying pans.
Okay.
What happened was that those things were already in development. But what happened with the space program was that I'm sure it was Teflon, but the people who were designing what's called the ablative shield, the heat shield. Yeah. That's what the frying pan comes from. But they were already being made and produced, but the impetus was they got a lot of money to develop it quicker, and that's why they got. And they created Velcro was already there, but it was adopted by NASA so that the astronauts could stick themselves to the side of the spacecraft and all this kind of stuff and hang things up and all, so they won't be floating around. So it's not true that it was invented for the space program, but it was moved on because of the money.
Got it. Brian also says, I recall reading at the time NASA during the last Apollo missions that every dollar spent in space yielded $6 worth of tech advances. Yeah. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to point that out. That those were, those are pretty.
I mean, well, get this. I mean, back in 1990, what's that? 31 years ago, I bought my first computer to work at home, and it was an Apple Mac Classic, and it was about the size of a toaster. Yeah. And the screen was black and white. Yeah. And it took to run that little machine, it took 16 megs.
Oh, easy, yeah.
16 megabytes, right? Apollo 11 Eagle landed on the moon with the world's advanced computer that had 1 megabyte of memory. Yeah. Yeah. So only 20 years later. Yeah. So Neil Armstrong landed on the moon with 1 megabyte of memory on his computer. And then 20 years later, I'm sitting with a little toaster-sized box on on my desk that was 16 times more powerful.
You know, the books. What were the name of the books that you wrote? It was the one book. The
Yeah,
moon.
it's called The Dark Side of the Moon.
Okay, and can be found on Amazon. And
Yeah, it's there on Amazon.
the basis of the book, though, speaks of the men that were killed in the missions or
No.
pre-missions.
Nobody was killed in the mission. There's only the shuttle that's killed well, not even, they were returning, weren't they? Columbus got a fly flying around. The Dark Side of the Moon is, when I write a book, I always try and look at it from a different angle, because there's a million books. It's like with the JFK thing. I did it from a different angle. There's a million books about NASA landing on the moon and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and everybody knows a lot of the people who went anyway, like Armstrong and all these people. And what I decided to do was write a book about the guys that didn't get to the moon, and the reason they didn't get to the moon was because they died in training, like the Apollo fire, which killed Chaffee, Grissom, and White. You know, those guys were trapped in there. It took them, I think, it took 30 seconds to die. You know, and then the other pilots were killed flying their aircraft.
Test pilots or what was him?
Well, they were astronauts, yeah. The first one, Ted Freeman, was in 1964, and he was the only one who died who hadn't been given a mission or hadn't flown in space. So he just joined NASA, and he crashed. A duck, a Canadian goose chap, smashed into his cockpit and caused him to crash, and he did a very brave thing, actually. The plane he was coming into land, and the goose, the snow goose, hit his canopy. Yeah. And it made him spin off. And his plane, and don't forget, this is over a second, you know, his plane was heading for a small village that was near the airport, and he was on his side. If he hadn't have turned, continued the arc, if he'd have ejected up, he would have been fine. But he turned, and on the arc, he was sideways, and he ejected, and he just plowed into the ground. So even then, he was showing what those people are like. He saved. He could have ejected safely, and the plane would have hit the town. Yeah, killing. You know, how many? And that's what he did. That was Ted Freeman. That was in 1964, and then there was a couple of others in 1966, and then the three died in Apollo in 67, along with C.C. Williams and another guy in 67 as well. So there's 9 altogether who died in training. And at least 3 of those would have walked on the moon. Gus Grissom was one, the second American in space. Ed White, the first American to walk in space. And another guy called C.C. Williams, Clifton Williams, who had been given the lunar module pilot spot on Apollo 12 with Pete Conrad. So he would have walked on the moon. He would have been the 4th man on the moon. But he died, and then Alan Bean got his place. Alan Bean was the painter guy. Yeah.
How do you think that? Well, I would have to say that when people came out and said that the moon landings were fake, or that they were videoed in a British studio or what have you, the families. What's that?
Stanley Kubrick. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah. So it must have been even more heart-wrenching for the families after the sacrifices that their family members had made in the trying to get off the ground, literally trying to get into space.
I think, yeah, they probably just thought they were a load of jerks, because they are. Because it would have been easier to go to the moon than it would have been to fake it, because there's so many people involved. Somebody's going to say something. And you've only got these idiots. You've not got anybody who worked there who's saying we didn't go to the moon.
Yeah, all the people that are involved. I mean, all the controllers in Florida alone. Yeah. The room full of thousands of people that are trying to get this thing. I don't know. I mean, there might be some. I think that there's definitely some doctoring going on with the photograph work and the audio playback. I think that a lot of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think that that's definitely censored. There's a few things that even to today, and they're catching themselves now because of all the technology we have got now. And what we're seeing is, investigative, minds now, what we've caught on camera, what's been going on. It's amazing with what we can do at home,
Well, you get people saying they're just misinformed. They've got no idea. They get people. One classic one that they come out with is there are no stars in the photographs of the astronauts.
Yeah,
well, anybody with half a brain or knows anything about camera, which clearly people don't, you have to do a different exposure, and the cameras were set because of the very reflective surface of the moon, and there's no atmosphere to fuzz anything. Everything's sharp and crystal clear.
Right.
So in other words, if any of the cameras would have been set to expose to the exposure to capture stars,
you would see the stars. You
would see the stars, but everybody else would be bleached out.
You'd lose focus on everybody there.
Yeah,
and I understand that.
I mean,
and you can go back and forth on that. I just, the thing that it's easier to accept the fact than, the cover up would be unbelievable of trying not to get there. I can understand the censoring of the information now. Yes. But I believe that they landed there, and I believe that, and some unprecedented things happened when they were there. Well, absolutely.
There's also another thing where people talk about the Van Allen belt of going through the radiation belt. The Van Allen belt protects the Earth.
Well, and that's a good point, because some people think that you would die going through that, right?
But you don't leave it, because because of the way the moon goes around the Earth and the Earth goes around the sun. Things don't just go straight. They're on, they're in circles and orbits and all this, and the Van Allen belt reaches the moon, and the way they go, it goes with them. You understand what I mean? And it's
okay.
They don't fly out of it, because as you know, when you go into the moon, you don't aim at the moon. You aim at the point where the moon will be in 3 days' time.
Right.
Because if you aim at the moon, it'll be 3 days away the other way, and you're going to carry on. And that's the genius of von Braun with his guidance systems.
Yeah.
Well,
there are a lot of people involved with the numbers, though. You've seen the movies. Some of the women that were involved in the calculations are incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
So it's the usual arguments, but they're not really arguments. They're just silly people, I think. That's just my opinion. Who come up with this stuff,
and to see the accomplishment of what was done. My biggest thing is when the first landing, Neil Armstrong, got off and got off the capsule and everything else, he was landed and then said the famous words, one step for man and all that. Radio silence. There was 2 minutes of radio silence and video, right? In that particular stead, there in that piece of when they landed, there was over 2 minutes where, and this is pretty much documented now, but where Neil talked on the medic, there was 2 different channels. They had the open mic, and then they had the medical mic. Yeah. He switched over to the medical mic, and he said, these, we've been observed since we've landed here. These things are huge, and they're right on the outside of the crater, and they've been here ever since. Anyway, interesting though. Again, and this is my job here to kind of throw out the conspiracy side of it. What are your thoughts on that kind of stuff? Do you?
Well, I can believe that, because they were there was one instance that turned out to be quite funny. I won't say it on here, but it was funny on Apollo 16 because of what they were talking about.
Okay.
And they were on the B channel, which is the medical channel, as you say. Mm-hmm. And they didn't think they were on any channel, and the B channel was open, but the B channel for some reason was live. So they even messed up the
yeah,
right. So they should have been safe anyway, but the B channel was live. But I just think it's like when they landed, when they actually touched down. Yeah, they did, and Neil Armstrong says, Tranquility Base, the Eagle is landing, and all that.
Right.
And then there's this silence for a bit, But you know what they're doing, don't you? They're not just standing there. They're turning the systems off so it doesn't
Well, I would think, yeah,
fire
they
off
have
and
to. Yeah,
making it safe. You know, this is
Sure.
what they're doing. And they're concentrating.
they got
And
protocols to do. Yeah, they got
yeah,
protocols.
they've got,
I'm sure.
I mean, they're thinking, well, this is great, but, you know, we might die here. And we don't
Yeah.
want to do that. So that's what they were doing in those situations. But I can believe that Armstrong said those things, because I had a book years ago and I loaned it to somebody and I never got it back. And I've never seen it since. And it spoke of it was supposedly telling you about the released B channel that they when they got out, because apparently the story goes, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but the story goes that when what we heard was that when they landed, NASA said to them, off channel, said to them that they had to have a sleep period,
Right.
Because they'd been up for 20 hours.
I remember hearing that.
Right.
And
Now-
their adrenaline's going. How are they supposed to sleep, right? They
Yeah,
just
exactly.
landed
Yeah,
on the-
exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, but what according to this book, and it's only a book, according to this book, this guy did this research, and he said that what happened during those 8 hours was that they went outside. Neil and Buzz went outside because of those spacecraft were on the crater rim, and they went out to have a look. And the story goes, and it's quite funny. You can imagine it happening, can't you? Neil Armstrong said, "Look, we're not going to sleep. We're not doing this. We can't sleep. We're just buzzing. You know, we're going out because we don't know what's going to happen. You know, something might happen while we're asleep or whatever." And he wanted to get on the moon, so they both went out. Oh, sorry, before they went out, NASA said, "You can't do it. Do not go." And Neil Armstrong reportedly said, "Stop me."
Yeah. What are
He's
they
on the
supposed to
moon.
do?
Yeah, so
Shut
they
the
couldn't-
lights off, go
so
home.
so they couldn't stop him. So apparently, according to this book, allegedly, they both went out and approached these things near the crater Moltke, I think it was.
Right.
And there were these huge,
Massive ships.
yeah,
You said they were
massive-
very foreboding too. They weren't
Yeah.
like
not
you know,
very friendly, but maybe they didn't look very friendly, are they?
right. Well, and you see the briefing when they got back after they've been debriefed, after they've been in a lockdown environment for 2 weeks or whatever it was, and then you see them at the conference, and they do not look. You would think they'd be euphoric. You think that it would be a celebration. You know, they did not look like they were prepared for. I mean, they were holding back a lot of things.
But I'm not sure, and you might know this, but I'm not sure whether that interview, which I've seen, was directly after they came out of isolation. Was it after they did the world tour?
It could have been. I don't know.
Because
it could have been out of context, like I said.
Exactly, because if you'd have been on the moon, if you'd have been training for 5 years,
right,
then gone to the moon and not seen your wife for all that time, and now you've got to go around the world for 2 months, you're going to be a bit pissed off, aren't you? So I don't know.
And you've said the story over and over and over again. So and again, the videos that we're referring to too, they have their own agendas, and that's something that we don't have here. We're just kind of throwing out the what we think was the true history, and possibly what these conspiracies might be. Willow's had a really. I want everybody to go back and look at some of the. I'm not going to post everything on this, but some really good conversations are going on in this in the comments here. Willow's got some really good, interesting perspectives on the Canadian government and the moon missions, or the lack of. And there's some discussion about the cameras in that from. I'm sorry, from Carl. He talked about the cameras and just the capacity of what we could do back then. I'm sure that they must have had the state of the art though. This is not a flash in the pan. State of the art for 1970 or whatever it was.
They had Carl Zeiss lenses on them. I mean, they're I don't think today there are better lenses than Carl Zeiss lenses.
Yeah.
Dan's right. It was Apollo 12 where the camera failed, the color camera, Apollo 12. Because there's a funny story in that where Pete Conrad and Alan Bean were on the moon, and Alan Bean's job was to set the camera up, and it wasn't working to begin with. It didn't work, and he was losing time. And they've got 60 million things to do. They've got every second is accounted for basically to do something, and he was behind on his timeline by about a couple of minutes because he was trying to fix the camera. So they told him to forget it, forget the camera, just get on with what the other stuff you've got to do. Anyway, the picture suddenly came on.
Yeah.
And he said, "It's come on, it's working. What do you do?" And Alan Bean said, "I hit it with my hammer." Out of frustration, and it worked. But then it failed again later, so we didn't get any color or many color pictures.
Best made plans of mice and men, right? Hello, Paul. How you doing? Pop Culture just stopped in and said hello too as well. So when do you think they're going to acknowledge the problems that they had, or the company that was there? When do you think that that's going to happen? I mean, we're obviously seeing so many people that are, and once I start talking about my information and what I've investigated with, when do you think NASA? Do you think they're ever going to? You think they're ever going to release a statement?
I think I don't know when, but don't forget that footage of that Navy aircraft. I think that's in 2004, isn't it?
Yeah.
It has that UFO in its sides.
Yeah.
So, well, that's 50 years since Neil Armstrong was watching these things. So,
yeah.
50 years from now, I don't know. It depends what happens, doesn't it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I tell you what's interesting. Recently happened, or a few years ago. Mm-hmm. You know how most religions say that we're the only thing that's around and all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
But the Vatican, who are one of the staunchest of that little theory, that there's nobody else but us. And the new Pope, I don't know his name, the new one, or the latest one, he was asked about this, and he said, "Oh yeah, of course there are. There are millions of planets out there. There's got to be life on some. Of course, sure. God would have made life somewhere else. So they're coming around as well."
I mean, how conceited do you think you have to be to think that you're the only? I mean, it just the numbers alone. Just thinking,
well,
it's incredible.
It shows you how retarded man is, because if you think about people like Plato and Archimedes and those people from 2,500 years ago, they were talking about and proving with mathematics that the Earth went around the sun.
Yeah.
But 2,000 years later, people were being burned alive at the stake for saying that because of the church. So
and they, and the other thing is too, I mean, we're kind of segueing into my section a little bit now on the conspiracy side of it. But there, Archimedes and Plato and that, they had knowledge of other very early on civilizations that were, what they call even the Pleiades, I think is what it's called. The Pleiades is the group of people, and the word means before the moon was in place is what the word. And so they had written history in the, whether it was in the Library of Alexandria or whatever, they had written history that they could base a lot of these stories on. It wasn't just a verbal thing. So now we've lost, now, we're reading things, bits and pieces here and there in different, scriptures or different Gnostic gospels, or like you said, Plato or Archimedes' background, they're different writings, and we're trying to piecemeal this whole thing together. No wonder we can think it's a conspiracy. No wonder people are panicking because they don't know, what to believe and what not to believe.
I don't think people are panicking.
I shouldn't say panic. That's a bad word. But there's concern for it. I think it's overly worrying concern that, and everything that I'm about to say, it doesn't change the fact that we still live on a beautiful planet. It doesn't change the fact that we have an amazing group of people that I'm affiliated with. It doesn't change the fact that there's some, I think that there's a lot of good energy in the world. What I'm about to go over right now is these are just tidbits of what I've investigated a few things, but it's something to really look at from a standpoint of mathematics, from a standpoint of architecture, from a standpoint of how did that happen? I mean, why is this the way it is? It's pretty staggering. So I'm not saying that the moon landings did not happen. I think that they did, but I think that there's a lot of things that, and I think you and I both agree, there's been a lot of censorship. There still is. Maybe it's for our own good. Maybe the powers that be, it's stating that. Maybe it's for civilization, so that people aren't tearing open the streets because,
Exactly.
and that
Exactly.
probably is probably very true. I know that in a lot of the things, as extraterrestrials or whatever you want to call it, that would ruin religion as a whole, which I don't think is such a bad thing in some regards.
Yeah.
Dogmas, dogma can be very dangerous if it's not presented properly. And
We
that's,
see that all the time, don't we?
yeah, right. And we see it time and time again throughout history. So with that, I think that like we're talking about, the man in the moon, the idea of the man in the moon was basically when you look at the moon, you see a face, or certain portions of the moon, you'll see an outline of a face. You'll see,
Yeah.
but you looking at anything, you can find shapes in, because we all do that as human beings. That was the initial idea of the man in the moon. Of course, cinematography or different movies and that things came out in the early 1900s, silent films just magnified that. I don't know where the moon was made of cheese. I don't know where that came from. I didn't really go down that rabbit hole, but I'm sure if anybody knows, chime in. But the interesting thing about the moon is that there's documentation throughout history, in all different walks of life, from pre-existing, from before the flood, before the deluge, of the time before the moon, before the time the moon was in the sky. And these are documents all over the place. Even the Gnostic Gospel, Philip talks about different things and the moon not being there. So what, and we were talking about, I forget if it was Socrates or who it was, but they were talking about the earth when there wasn't tides the way that they are now. The tidal waves, not tidal waves, but the tidal waves.
Yeah.
The seasons, things of that sort. These are all mandated by the moon, by the way that the gravitational pull works and everything else. And I'll go into that in a minute. But they, the concern that the Earth had still life on it before the moon was in place is good. They talked about there's a writing, I forget now. I wish I would have had it here. I should have had it. They talk about the writing of the world, the way that the world actually was very foggy, if you want to call it that, and the sun didn't actually hit the earth the way it does now, where it scorches the earth. And they talk about, this is all before the moon was in place. So I told you, early on, we talked about the Zulu tribes and the 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago. These are oral traditions that they have talked about because they didn't really have a written language. And they talk about these two beings, if you want to call them scale people or fishy people or lizard people, whatever you want to call it that. They talked about these aliens that came and brought this ship. And essentially the ship is the moon. And they talk about it being a hollowed out, an oakless egg. It's like an egg without a yolk on the inside of it. And that was the planetoid that they brought into the space of where Earth is. Now, there was a smaller moon there at one time. They since removed it. I don't know how that happened, but that's how the story goes. And there's been other stories of different civilizations that have had the same similar thing. They talk about the deluge. They talk about when the moon came into play, how it shifted the earth. It turned the earth over, literally. And that's why all this flooding happened and the moist air turned into water and it flooded and flooded and flooded. And this is all the, biblical story. We've heard about the floods, and it might have happened several times. I don't know. I wasn't there, but there's definitely, if there's correlation and you've got historians talking about this in different scriptures and different books, not just holy books, but documented storylines throughout history about pre-moon, that's something to think about. Okay, so, I try to be devil's advocate and to see. I'm not saying there's a bunch of lizard people in the moon, but it's interesting to see the dynamic of how big the moon is in comparison to other satellites, if you want to call them that, other moons around other planets like Jupiter. I mean, the moon is so huge in comparison to our Earth. As far as a planetoid goes, it's unbelievable.
Quarter the size.
It is. It's 72 times the size it should be. That's nuts.
What do you mean should be? What does that mean?
Okay, so each of the planets have moons, have gravitational pull, right? Yeah. Everything has things. So if the moon came in that size of a planetoid, came in, it should have rightfully hit the earth and we would no longer be here. There's no rhyme or reason structurally or physically that it should be where it's at and being in the what they call tidal lock of how it goes around. Okay, that's the first thing. So one, it's a huge, it's too large to be here. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it has the tidal lock like we talked about. And I know it spins, but it does not spin the way it should spin. If
what
the Earth,
what do you mean should spin?
okay, so the Earth is so large and we have such mass weight-wise, okay, that should take that moon. And this is all done. This is all physics. This is these have been published. This is just Ted talking. The moon actually should spin very wildly because of our magnetic attraction to it. It should be not out of control, but it should be in a spin factor. And you know as well as I do, it doesn't spin more than 20. What is it? Every 27 days? I think that's the 27.3 days.
It's exactly one orbit.
Okay,
one rotation for one orbit.
Right. So, and in that, the way that it's so unique and it's so precise. It's 1 trillion to 1 that would be like that. But the size of the moon alone is where it's just, it's almost easier to prove why it shouldn't be there than why it is there. And that's where I'm getting at. And this is just the beginning. I know I'm talking too much, but just wait. So if you have the moon, or say that this microphone's the Earth, okay? And if the moon comes in, normally it goes around the equator. A moon, a satellite, whether it's Jupiter, Saturn, whatever, it always goes around the equator. Ours is 5 degrees off of the equator. To even mandate that further of how crazy that is. So now you've got the moon that's in tidal lock that doesn't spin. It's in perfect position. And it's 5 degrees off of where it should be. And the reason why it does that is so that the Earth doesn't wobble. It shifts. So it's a counterbalance. And that's why we have the seasons and all these other things that are makes this planet so amazing. So, I mean, I don't like thinking of it as a prison at all, but it's a very interesting, if it is positioned here, that is amazing. And if it happened, say 200,000 years ago or longer, the technology of whoever put it there, it's so far beyond our comprehension. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. And these are things that scientists have talked about for years. But the big thing is that the moon is so large. They didn't understand why it would be. I don't even think there is any other. I'm going to go on a limb here. Any other on the solar system, there's no moon that is larger in comparison to the planetoid that it goes around. But it's 72 times larger than where it should be. The other thing is that our moon is positioned so perfectly that it eclipses the sun perfectly. There's no rhyme or reason, and it is exactly, it blocks it completely. So, and that doesn't happen any other area in that mathematical equation. Yeah. So those are two interesting facts that are overwhelming for me to think that, okay, that's interesting. Now, I'm not saying it's a satellite or it's a Death Star or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it's interesting that those things are actually something that happened and that we benefit from So if there was divine intervention, whatever you want to call it, that's pretty amazing. And the other thing is too, it's over a million years older than Earth. So, okay, so now you've got this thing that shouldn't be there. Now it's older than Earth, and now it's got metals on top of the everything that's going on with it. There's manufactured metals that they found on there, titanium, things
Where did they find those?
Those were in the when they drilled into the moon, when the moon lander, when they landed, they drilled into they couldn't get all the way. They couldn't even get in through the first whatever foot of it, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And they started finding titanium. I forgot if they found brass. there's copper. There's a few things that didn't. They were manufactured like offshoots. Like titanium doesn't. I don't believe it is found naturally.
No,
I think it's a mix of alloys or whatever. But
Uh,
there's certain things like that that's fascinating. I know I'm talking too much, but I'm just trying to prove a point. But it's interesting. It's just fascinating. What was the name of that lander that they shot down after when they left? That it went and hit the moon.
they did that twice. They did that Apollo 12's ascent module. The lunar module's in two parts.
Right. And
They land with the legs, and that forms the launching pad. And then when they come back, the top bit comes off. That's the ascent stage.
okay.
So
And what happened when that crashed?
Well, I'll tell you. So they got back in, got the samples, went back to the command module, and they've sent it into the moon to test the seismometers that they'd placed and that Apollo 11 had placed. And they smashed it in, and when it hit, it would be something like a ton of TNT going off.
Yeah.
And it shattered. And then on the next mission, we'll get to your point, because I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Then the next mission, Apollo 13, which didn't land, as we all know that.
Right.
What they did was they would have done a similar thing, but they needed that to get back. So they kept the lunar module on the end of the command module because they needed that to get back.
Right.
But they still wanted to do the experiment. So what they did, all the Apollo craft are followed by the third stage, which houses the lunar module.
Yeah.
And they pull it out. It's got like these doors, and they pull it out. But you don't just stop in space. You're always moving. And they pull away from the third stage, and then so the third stage is always behind them, a couple of 100 miles. They get away from it.
Okay.
And they fired that into the moon to test the seismometers. Now, what you're saying is when they did the Apollo 12 ascent stage, they say it rang like a bell. The moon rang like a bell,
like a gong. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
now
for hours and hours.
Well, not for hours, for just over an hour. Apollo 12.
Okay.
And that could be done because the moon's a lot drier than the Earth, and the rock is harder. So, and water, as you know, weakens rock, and water acts as a sponge for vibration and stuff like that. But it's very dry on the moon.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no atmosphere, right?
There's no atmosphere, so it would ring. But having said that, they found water on the moon, and Apollo 14 found that, and it was something like they found enough water locked in the poles. It's something like a quart for it. If they released this water, they would fill 250,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
Yeah,
which is quite a bit of water, really.
Sure.
But what we're saying about the crash, that it would ring, and they've also found water under the surface.
Right.
And the surface, I think, is only about 15 miles. The crust is only about 15 miles thick, and the water's under there, and that would absorb it, that would absorb the vibration. But because it didn't come through to that, it was just ringing. And that's the official version of it. I don't know. I don't know physics and things.
Now you're talking about the first time they dropped the second time they sent something else up there. It was even more heavier.
Yeah, the third stage of Apollo 13.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
They sent that in.
And it rang longer though on that one.
Yes, it did. Yeah, because that was a bigger vehicle.
Right. It was bigger explosion or whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
That and what I'm getting at is that they talk about it being a hollow satellite, in this theory, this conspiracy theory. But this is what's interesting. I don't know how they weigh. They must do it with mathematics. They know what the Earth weighs, which blows my mind. And they're stating also that the moon is actually weighing less than it should. So they're stating that it being hollow in the inside would cause this phenomenon. I don't know. So the ringing of it, the being lighter than what it should be because the mass, there's a lot of things there that are way past my pay grade.
Well, you were saying before about the moon being 5 degrees of the tilt.
Yeah.
Is the moon locked in with the equator?
No, it's off.
Right. That's what I thought. Because the Earth is tilted at 23 degrees
Yes,
to the ecliptic, which is the straight bit.
correct.
And all the planets are all on the ecliptic.
Yep.
But the Earth is tilted 23 degrees. So the moon is not on the ecliptic then.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying? It's not.
Yep.
It's going at an angle.
And all of the other ones throughout the solar system are all on the equator.
Right.
On each planet. It's just these are arguments to prove that it's in the conspiracy theory. That's the rub of it. You know, and as we're getting more, I'm going to show them that picture that you kind of giggled at. You know, this is obviously an artist rendering. To do something like this would be unbelievable. I mean, I can't even fathom that. The time it would take. It's like the pyramids that we were discussing. The technology, everything else that is, I don't know.
Well,
it blows my mind that the concept is it's very science fiction. But anyway,
to me, as we said earlier, to me that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, because the spotlights,
they're huge.
Must be about 20 miles wide.
Yeah, they've got to be. They're huge. They're massive.
But what about this? Just imagine that you were coming from another planet. You're an alien coming, and you came to Earth, and you had the technology to build that. Why don't you want me to see it? Why have you covered it with all this stuff?
I'm glad you said that. I am glad that you asked that question, because I'll continue on with the conspiracy of it all.
Right. Okay.
So let's remove that for a second. So the idea is that okay, so they've found this planet. Okay, the planet works great. Other civilizations, other alien civilizations. This is the story anyway of how they have taken over. And you and I talked about this too, about the Giza Plateau. Maybe it was done by some other ancient civilization that the pharaohs took over and such. Well, this is kind of the same scenario. So you've got these two brothers, lizard people, if you want to call them that or whatever. This is the conspiracy idea. And we talked about David Icke, and all these other people have talked about this. I'm not saying that I believe this at all. It's just a fascinating, rabbit hole. It's just interesting to me. And he said that that this race came in and they wanted to take over the Earth. And this is how they do it. So they bring this in, they distort it. It is a Death Star in some regards, I guess you could think of it like that. Turn the Earth over, knock out all the giants or whatever else that are, and there's just a few of the species left, Adam and Eve, so to speak. All right. And this is how the whole story goes of the Satan and the demon and the snake and all this other stuff, and the Garden of Eden and all this. The other thing, I'm not trying to get too graphic here, and if I do, I offend anybody, I'm sorry. It's also stated that in the Zulu tradition that before the moon was there, women didn't menstruate. That was part of the thing, because of the way that the moon's positioned, everything. It's causes things with the body, everything else. And that's interesting. The story of the Bible, how Eve is cursed from the, it's a fascinating thing. Anyway, goes really, really down but that's what it's so entrenched in a story that it's almost it could be believable as a movie. I mean, it could be, it's like so far-fetched. And that's the thing. These beings don't, they need a race of people that maybe mined for them, gold or whatever. They needed beings that they need to, and we'll talk about resonance and that in another show. You and I will go further into that, but they need energies from these, they're kind of energy vampires. That's the conspiracy idea. They talk about these, the moon being a frequency channel, and it basically puts down a frequency towards Earth that makes us all, warmongers, not truth mongers. We're very agitated all the time. We're very, all this, and we're constantly Cain and Abel, and that breeds this energy that these creatures live off of. And that's how this whole thing works. We're here to power to nurture them. and that's how it works. And we're just dumbed down, and we don't know who we really are. And that's the conspiracy of it all.
The two flaws there, I think. The first one is, imagine these giants, and I'm not saying the giants weren't around, because I believe they were, like you
I
did.
think they were too. Yeah.
You know, those guys we discussed this last time.
Yeah.
Those
and
guys.
We're going to talk about that
those,
later.
Those guys in Egypt who were sitting down at the Valley of the Kings, they were that size, right?
Right.
Now, so those guys are 20 feet high, 15, 20 feet high. Wouldn't you think, right? So these alien guys come along and they tow the moon in with them, and it messes up the earth and it turns upside down, and there's a massive flood, and everybody drowns except a few 5'10" humans. Are you not telling me that somebody 20 feet high would have more chance of surviving in the water than people our size?
Yeah.
Right. Do you see what I mean?
Well, right, the wipeout. Yeah. I mean,
and the other thing is, before to pick up your other point, these aliens come. So these aliens have come from, well, let's say they came from the nearest star.
Okay.
Proxima Centauri, 4.2 light years.
Yeah.
Traveling at our speeds, it would take something like 25,000 years to get there, or 4 million, whatever it is.
Well,
but let's just say they can come through wormholes or whatever and get here immediately. And they bring the moon with them. Okay. So they're that, and these people are that advanced. They're that advanced that they've found the Earth, and it's full of gold, and like good people, they want all the gold, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants. We all want the gold. They do as well. So they come all this way from wherever they've come from, dragging this big planetoid,
or flying in it. Yeah. Or they're in it.
Yeah. All right.
that's their starship.
Right, they've flown it, and they thought, oh, this is great. There's a load of gold down there. Now, we've come from the other side of the galaxy. It's taken us 20 million years to get here. So what we'll do is we'll get them people on that planet to dig up the gold for us. Right. Don't you think they'd have some kind of machine that might just do it?
Well, they do. I mean, that's what they're, I mean, it goes.
What are we doing then? What are these guys doing down in gold mines then?
Or that's what I'm saying. Okay, so it goes so far past all of this. The hollow moon's nothing compared to the rest of this conspiracy. Tonight we're just talking about the hollow moon, but
okay.
I get what you're saying on that, and you're right, absolutely. What would be the main reason to do it all? Okay, so I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that there's so many different facets to this whole.
Okay, so you're going to think, right? Because these people who came here so clever, they would probably realize that we were quite intelligent beings and that we would get further on.
Right. So
what they do is they would probably know that at some point we're going to get off the planet. It's like 2001, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
So they, however long it is, 40,000 years or 40 million, okay. Whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So they know that we're going to find out all this stuff. Don't you think it's a bit silly putting this moon where it is so perfectly and a quarter the size and altering the tides and all this kind of thing? Or are they just having a laugh? Have they had a bet? I think it'll take them 40,000 years to work this out. Well, I think it'll take them. It's ridiculous. Well, it's there because it's there.
There's just so many things that it shouldn't be there. That's the thing. That's at least the mathematics. And again, that could be an agenda too. It could be a rabbit hole that they directed us towards just to get us away from something else.
And it could just be it could be an agenda to make you look the other way, like most things are.
Exactly. Bait and switch. Yep.
But the moon is mostly granite, isn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Right, and so is the Earth. And the one theory is that the Earth was hit by something like a meteorite.
So and we were just talking. I was just reading this.
So
Dan said that actually no, I'm sorry. Dan said earlier about that too as well. The last latest theory. Hold on. Latest theory is that the moon was created by an impact event.
So effectively, the Earth-Moon system is a double planet, like Pluto and Charon.
Right. And that's the other thing that's what Carl was talking about.
If you look at Pluto, which
or
has
not
been
Pluto, but Neptune. They were Dan. I'm just bringing this up just because
Yeah.
they got some really good points, and that's
Exactly.
something too. Again, the videos and the some of the explanations that I've read don't bring up the other counterpoint
That's
of this
what I
theory,
was going to
and that's what I'm
mention.
saying.
That
Everybody's
later,
got an
yeah.
agenda, right? So
Yeah, but if you look at that's right, Neptune is lying on its side. Yeah.
right.
If you look at Pluto, the malign planet, because 1 week it's a planet and 1 week it's not.
Yeah.
That was it Humboldt, I think he was called, discovered that in 1930.
Right.
Right. So that's sort of within living memory. Right.
Yes.
And then I think it was about when was it? They found Charon. It wasn't that long ago. I think it was about 2002 or something, or maybe a bit before that. But they found it had a moon, and then they found out that it wasn't a moon. It was just the same size or thereabouts, and it's orbiting itself like the Earth and the moon.
Yeah.
So did these guys who brought the moon leave another one? Because have you seen there's not many good photographs of Pluto because it's too far.
Right.
But it's like it's just the freak of nature. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I mean, I can understand that point, but just the precision of where it is and how far it is from the sun, how far it is from Earth. I can go more into mathematics. I don't really want to do that. It's daunting. It's daunting, but
that argument is the same as this so-called Goldilocks zone where we live.
Right.
Why are we so precisely placed around the sun?
I know. And
that we can grow?
And what are we going to do about it? Not a damn thing. We can't do anything about it. And that's what I said earlier at the beginning of this. It's like I'm just throwing this out there so that people can hear it. And then, you know what? This is a beautiful planet, and there's a lot of beautiful people on it, and we can make it really great. So regardless of there's a bunch of lizard people living up there or not, this is what we got. And except, I'm not flying a big, all due respect to everybody here, the space race thing that's going on right now. I'm not going to fly a big dick out to the space and come back. I don't care. I don't have the money for that. I don't want to do that. It's great. I'm awesome. I'm great. I'm glad they can do that. But I just, I mean, if it's a hollow moon, fantastic. If it's not, fantastic. Great. If there's creatures on it or if there's UFOs, well, you know what? We're not the first ones to know about it. People have been seeing this stuff. And now, I mean, they're talking, you've got the cameras that you can get now. It's incredible what you can see on the moon. It's unbelievable. And there's going to be phenomena on it. You can't get around it. So I don't know. There's all different kinds of angles to look at it. But
the moon, there's a moon, I don't know what it's called. It's an orbiter. It's been photographing the entire surface, and it's captured the landing sites, hasn't it? Have you seen those photographs? Yeah. And you can see the descent stage all burnt out, and you can see the experiments. You can even see the footprints on some of them.
Sure.
But people just say, well, that's just Photoshop. Well,
I mean, again, you gotta trust somebody. I mean, there are also other things that they've found. There's been some insiders that talk about these glass structures, these ancient ruins that were there from whoever was there before. And some of these buildings are 6 miles high, or some of these structures. I can't even imagine that height. We were talking about giants living. I mean, what if they're still? I mean, what if they're still around? Whatever. What if they're flying around? I mean, we base everything on our scale, on our heights, and our, where we are. Yeah. Maybe they're, I don't know, live and let live, as long as they're not like malicious entities.
But there was easy, because that's what science fiction does. That's where all the B movies,
right?
all that Cold War paranoia.
There's got to be a balance to it. There's got to be good and bad, though. There's,
Oh yeah, there's good and bad everywhere. But it's like I said earlier, I can't accept that a group of, alien sentient beings would be flying around everywhere. Leaving moons so that some guy can develop over 150,000 years, so he can dig a hole and get gold out. If I was that other guy, the alien guy, I'd make a machine that just did it.
Well, but that's not what they did, though. Again, the conspiracy thing, we're talking about the hollow moon today, but they talk about the genetic splicing and all the things. There's no missing link. We go from one species superimposed to the next one. There's no missing link. It happens instantly, and so there's got to be some type of alteration there. Well, we're going to talk about this on the Truth Mongers some other time. But
I agree. I agree, because a lot of people think that we descended from monkeys and
Yeah,
apes.
well,
Well,
you know.
by definition, there wouldn't be any monkeys and apes, would there?
Right.
So
Right.
we didn't. I know they're similar,
There's-
but
so
don't
if you're gonna,
forget.
I would rather have a workforce that's going to be completely not dumbed down, but genetically altered, so that all they
Yeah.
think about is gold is the thing. You know, gold is it, and it
Well-
belongs to the gods. And all these stories, these are all throughout ancient Sumerian texts.
Yeah.
They all talk about gold being owned by the gods. It goes on and on. And so, yeah, it's just fascinating, the rabbit hole that we go down, just trying to find out about if the moon's supposed to be artificial or not. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I forgot what I was going to say.
We were talking about them just building a machine to get the gold out, is what you were saying. That was when I interrupted you. Sorry.
Sorry, carry on.
Okay. But the can I keep talking while you're thinking about it?
yeah.
But as far as the it would make a lot of sense if I was a being that lived off of other people's angst and anxiety, that I would set up shop. I would basically put a tuner that basically played all due respect to thrasher metal and all the lovers of that, and just pounded all the time, and make people feel crappy, and then the energy that they're putting out, I'm absorbing, because that's my sustenance, right? That's awesome. What a great gig, and then you know what we're going to do is, as we do that, we're going to end up tell them to be fruitful and multiply. So now there's even more of them. Okay, this is awesome. And they only have a short lifespan now because we're putting all this, we shorten their lifespan with the DNA. So it just keeps churning through. We got millions and millions of people. We could live forever. That's the concept of it all. That's why I said it was kind of scary. When I'm like, wow, that's kind of sick.
Maybe so.
It's kind of sick.
But what I was going to say before was regarding the evolution thing.
Yeah.
Don't humans have more in common with salmon than they do with apes or something? There's something we're closer to a salmon or something. But maybe that's maybe I'm wrong on that.
We've got a reptilian mind. That's an interesting thing. We match a crocodile's. There's a certain portion of our brain that match. That's fascinating, especially when they talk about these lizard gods that came from another. That's fascinating.
Yeah,
crazy.
But don't forget as well, when you look at hieroglyphics, and you see those guys with the eagle heads and all that.
Sure.
Now, maybe that's just an interpretation of their hierarchy.
That could be. Absolutely.
I'm not saying I go with that. I'm just throwing that in.
No,
because
I think what we're here for. This is an open discussion.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. And actually, the discussion that we're having, Dan's got some really good points too. Yeah, they're talking about and that's one thing. You and Dan and Joe Dog, they know so much about these launches and then all these things that are going on with it's amazing everything that's going on right now with the I don't want to call it the space race, but just it's incredible, just incredible. I don't even know. And I was joking about, I just think it's kind of funny how we have billionaires just designing their own phallus and flying to space. That's great, but it's very
it's all a hoax.
Buck Rogers.
It's all conditioning. We are now learning that anybody can go in space because those two guys they're just well, I know they're rich, but they're just ordinary people. They're not military trained.
You don't remember the story, Andy? Who was it? Shoot. Well, they had a story, a show back in the 80s, and the guy basically built a rocket in his barn. And he flew, and that was part of the whole story. This is the whole story of the show. If anybody remembers that, I forget. God, I can't even think of his name. Andy, whatever his name was, can't think of his name. But yeah, he had this rocket in the barn. Andy Griffith, thank you, Carl. You must not have seen it in Britain. So he had a junkyard, and I mean, it was just he built this freaking rocket, and it was nuts. But I don't think that's Salvage One. Brian, everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. Okay, Salvage One, yeah. You didn't have that amazing show? Okay.
No.
I mean, I've seen shows where they put people in washers, like a washer and dry. They built it's just nuts.
The best story about the capsule is the one I told you about, the Russian what's the Russian parachutist. I told you about that, didn't I?
No.
You want
Tell
me to tell
everybody,
you that?
tell everybody about that.
Right. When they were testing the Vostok capsule.
Hey. Voss, be good, because I own a couple Vostoks, so
Right.
be nice about
Right.
them.
East.
They're a
It's
great
Russian-
band.
it's
They're a great watch.
It's Russian for East Vostok. Right. So what
Great
they did
watch.
when they were training Gagarin and Komarov and all the first Russian Soviet astronauts, they're very precious, aren't they? These guys are very precious because they're top pilots and they've spent a lot of money and all that kind of thing. So what they did was, you know, where American spacecraft, the astronaut comes back in the capsule. Well, Soviet astronauts then bailed out of the capsule. Now, a Vostok
Where in space?
No. A Vostok capsule is round. It's like a ball, and that's because they didn't have the guidance system to turn the capsule, like the Americans did, to face the ablative shield, the heat shield, to the atmosphere. So they just let it come in any old how, right? Which is quite a decent thing to do, really, because it's one more stress turning the spacecraft round, isn't it? Anyway,
yeah.
And then at 40,000 feet, which is higher than you fly when you go on a commercial airliner,
Sure.
they bailed out and skydived all the way down.
Wow.
And there's the story when Gagarin landed wherever it was he landed in the middle of nowhere in Siberia. There was a woman apparently hanging up her washing, and he's got his space helmet on and he's got this parachute over his shoulder, and he walks up to her and he's got this orange suit on, and she said apparently he says when he was there, she said to him, "Oh, are you from outer space?"
Right.
and he said, "Yeah." Da, you know. Anyway, so what
started
they did,
a whole religion. Yeah.
So what they did is,
crazy.
so what they were doing when they were testing the capsule,
Yeah.
they didn't put the astronauts in it, or cosmonauts in it. They didn't put Gagarin to test it. So they got this guy, and I don't know his name, but he was the top Soviet skydiver, and he'd done 500 parachute jumps from way up. He was the most expert one the Soviets could get.
Okay.
So they gave him the big honor. You know, Khrushchev gave him the big honor of being the guy who tested the capsule to see whether the astronaut could get out safely.
Fair enough.
As it's coming down on the parachute, they didn't want to manually open the door. So they created explosive bolts. So the door flew off, and then the chair came out a second later.
Yeah.
And then so the astronaut would be sitting in his chair, the parachute would deploy, and then he'd unbuckle, and then he'd jump out of the chair and skydive for 3 hours and then land on the parachute. So they sent this guy up in this Vostok capsule underneath an aircraft, and then they dropped it like they did with the X-15s. You know, when they drop it, they have them underneath and they just shoot off. So he goes up in the aircraft, climbs into the capsule. He's got his parachute on. He knows the mission. They drop the capsule, and at a certain height, when the plane's gone, so it's like there's no interference, he pressed the button, blew the doors off, shot out, and landed. And then he's in the middle of nowhere again, the middle of Siberia. So they have these army trucks looking for him. So they went to find him, and they couldn't find him. They found the capsule.
Needle in a haystack. Yep.
They found the capsule with no door on, with blood round it. So they know he's in trouble. But they know he's got out because there's no chair.
It was probably pressurized. I can't imagine it not being, but
right.
Okay.
So they find the chair. So they found the capsule with blood around the exit, the door. They find blood on the top of the chair.
Okay.
And I think he's in trouble, this guy. And about 3 days later, they found him, and he had no head. His head had come off. I think they found his head, but he'd been decapitated, and they couldn't work out why. And when they had an inquiry, what they'd done was, because scientists and people like that don't like apertures in spacecraft because it's a weakness, like in a house. You'll know that it's a weakness in the structure, isn't it?
Sure.
So they had to get the guy out. So they cut the door. I don't know how big it was. Imagine a chair size. They cut the door to fit the chair. Well, the guy's head was above the chair, so it knocked his head off.
God, I can't believe you're
It's not-
laughing at that. That's
I'm going
terrible.
to say it's not funny, but it is. It's just because it's just obvious, isn't it? Because they must have tested that door coming off with the chair coming out before they did it.
Yeah.
They must have realised it only just fit through the door. Anyway,
They sure the guy wasn't taller than what he.
I don't know.
You know, I know that we're getting off subject here a little bit, but there's an engineering. There was a show called Faces of Death when I was a kid, and it would show how people died, or it was I don't know if it's fictional or what it was. It had a group of engineering students on a 15th floor building, and you know what bungee jumping is, right?
Yeah.
They got bungee cords. Well, they jumped and they mismeasured because there was no 13th floor, and the guy plowed himself right into the ground. So same idea, same engineering feat. Unfortunately, common sense. Back to common sense. And common sense and conspiracies as well. Dan says, no, I'm assuming he's talking to me. There were dozens of proto-human species. We evolved alongside apes, so apes are just cousins, not ancestors. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying there wasn't some divine intervention, if you want to call it that, but there's got to be something. But my biggest thing in like all of it and all the conspiracy stuff that we're talking about is, how long has this been going on? Like, I mean, there's so many things that we talked about with the pyramids. With this, the hollow moon, how long's the moon been there? Okay, we know it's older than Earth. Okay, so it must have gotten here, even if it did it on its own merit or whatever. If it's not a satellite, if it's not artificial satellite, when did it get here? How did it get? Did it just fall into place? Was it orbiting around everything else and then just ended up landing there in perfect position, which is kind of mind blowing to me. I still don't buy it, but and then the size that it is, I just there's got to be something else. And let's go back to what we were talking about at the beginning with Buzz Aldrin. These things are huge, and they've been watching us since we got off. Okay, what are they? Where are they? Are they inside the moon? Are they on the back side of the moon? What's going on? I mean, and are they huge because they're giants? I mean, are they huge because they're full of, mini people? What? I mean, what's the thing? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And I open that up to everybody in the show right now.
I know what you mean. I'm not really sure about that, but I do know that all the astronauts claim that they were followed. Every astronaut has claimed they were followed while they're in orbit or whatever. Gagarin said he was. Mm-hmm. And that was revealed a long time after he died. But I think it was Gemini 7, Frank Borman and Jim Lovell. They filmed an object. They told NASA there was an object, outside the window, but just a bit back.
I saw that.
And they said, "Well, film it." So they took this 16mm film of it. And they took photographs of it. And when they came back, then it went back behind them. They couldn't see it. It went out of their sight. Right. And Borman described, and this is on a transcript, I think, he described markings on it, like insignia on this craft. Right. So it couldn't be. They first asked where the second stage was of the, I forgot what
the rocket or what?
The rocket
so they
was.
thought it was debris or whatever the rocket. Yeah.
And they can log where all that stuff is because they don't want it to crash into it and all that kind of thing.
Sure.
And this thing shouldn't be there. And so they filmed it. And when they came back on the debrief, when the astronauts watched the films developed and the photographs are developed and they go through it, the object was there, but there were no markings on it. There was nothing. It was just like a blank piece of. And the scientist said it was just one of the panels that come off and was just
waving or whatever. Yeah,
just turning around.
I heard them say that because of the way that the windows are in the craft too, when they're filming out, some particulates got between the two lenses, the two pieces of glass. I don't know. I mean, there's just too many circumstances. I mean, I really thought they were going to say something when over the I can't think of the name of it now. The in the Holy Land they have the mount. I can't think of basically it's where the stone that they built the church on, basically, and the dome is there. Okay, and they had the huge light that came down. I don't remember seeing that orb that came down
Yeah.
and went all the way down into the building. They've got it on film. It's incredible. And then it shot off like a bullet.
Wasn't that in the Vatican?
No, that was
Right.
I can't think of where it was. I know it was I thought it was in Jerusalem, but
Right.
anyway, but in any case, there, I
I've seen
thought
that,
for
yeah.
sure once they had that, I mean, that's 30,000 people saw that real time, and it's on videos all over the world, and they're
think-
still,
Is it not called electricity, like in a storm?
that's not electricity, man. I mean, there's energy there, but there's no way that, I mean, it could be phenomenon. Yeah, there's always that. But if I was and this is something too, if I was set up as an alien species or whatever, why would I send my people out to do surveillance like that? Why wouldn't I send drones out? Why wouldn't I just do especially if I'm that far advanced, why would I send out,
Exactly.
why? And, if the moon is a base, they've got, you can see lights and everything else moving in and out of the moon constantly. You see it. You can see it with a regular telescope. It's crazy. What it is, God knows. I have no idea, and I'm not.
Well,
I'm not going to challenge it. I just think that's interesting that
it could be when the UFOs. I mean, we all know what UFO stands for.
Yeah.
But people, if you mention a UFO, most people immediately think you mean little green men and aliens. But it's not. I think most UFOs that have been seen over the years are advanced aircraft.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I think they're advanced aircraft using alien technology.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any little green men in them, because they might crash and then they'll be discovered like they were in Roswell.
Yeah, right. And again, there's so many things we can go down with that. That's a whole nother that's a whole nother show too. But I think that there's something to be said about whether you think the moon is fake or not. The moon landings, whether you think they're fake or not. Like I said, I think that they actually did happen. And I think that there was, and it's too bad that for whatever reason we didn't go back. And there must be some type of reason, and or we weren't told that we went back. I know we talked about Buzz Aldrin talking about that too. He talked about Mars. He talked about them being. There's a monument, or not a monument, or something of that sort on Mars. And once people find out about that, they're going to ask who left that there. Who, what was that all about? So, I mean, I'm sure that they've traveled. They've got other type of propulsions. I wouldn't be surprised if they've gone already to a couple different places and they just haven't told us yet.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Whatever. I mean, there's certain securities, I'm sure, but
you mentioned earlier about the information and when we're going to find out, and it just reminds me of Ronald Reagan with his, or was it George Bush with his trickle down? There was no water anywhere except on Earth. Well, every planet is full of it.
Well, and they're saying that space is full of water. Space has got water as far as ice or that.
Well, that's what comets do, isn't it?
Right. Halley's Comet ice, right?
Yeah,
or part of ice. So. Yeah,
it's like a big snowball going through space.
Right.
And getting closer and
super
closer.
High velocity. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And it comes down every 76 years. And I went up in a plane and saw that.
Really?
In 1986 when it came around. Yeah.
That's kind of neat. What was that like? You did get to see it. It was pretty.
You had to know where you were looking. They told you where you were, because you couldn't really. It wasn't just it. Yeah. But you could see it. Yeah, it was quite. It couldn't. If you'd have been looking, if an ordinary person would have been looking out the window and not known it was there, you probably would have missed it. You'd have seen it, but you wouldn't have known what it was.
Yeah.
But they told you where it was and what to do. And it was great. Yeah, I went up at Manchester Airport. Went up for an hour or so. It was brilliant. But I upset the person doing the talk. She was, I can't remember her name now, but she was our top astronomer. And she was going through because I'm a smart ass, you see.
Now you're a truth monger.
I'm a smart ass because what happened was before we went up, we had this like briefing of what things were, and she had, and the famous picture that was taken by Apollo 17. I think Gene Cernan took it. I'm not sure, of the full Earth.
Oh yeah, sure.
That photograph, by the way, is the second most requested. The first NASA photographs, the first one is the one of of Buzz Aldrin that
Yeah.
Neil Armstrong took.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she had that on a slide, and she's showing us these slides of Halley's Comet and all this kind of thing. And she put that picture of the Earth in, and she was showing us how wonderful the Earth is from space. And she had it in the wrong way around. So Saudi Arabia was on the west coast.
Yeah.
And I said, she said, any questions? So me being a smart ass and having half a brain said, very interesting, but that slide is the wrong way around because you've got Saudi Arabia on the west coast of Africa. And she said, oh yeah, oh. She wouldn't talk to me after that.
You
got to
Brits,
get it right. You've got to get it
Brits are
right.
something else, man.
No,
You
she
Brits-
was a Brit. She got it wrong. You've got to get. You can't get something like that wrong, can you?
Well, it was a
that.
slide, right? It was a slide. Give her a little bit of,
No, she should have checked.
gotta
Before
give her
she-
some.
No, she should have run through it, and you've got to get things like that right.
Yeah, I guess.
You know,
When you got Glenn in the audience, yeah, you do. My dad was like that too, though. He would have pointed that out too. So he was Welsh, Brit.
I know.
So yeah. I'm just saying. Okay, so I pretty much that was it on the conspiracy thing. I think that in my closing statements, though, I think that it is something to definitely think about. There's a reason that the moon is so large and so perfectly aligned and so perfectly. It doesn't have any. It's not a magnetic planetoid. Earth is, and so in that, gravity and everything else should be throwing this thing into a whirlwind, and it's not. And it has been here, people have been documenting it for hundreds of thousands of years. And it correlates with the floods. It correlates with that and the environment that we're in right now. We can't really do anything about it, but it's an interesting thing, an interesting notion. I'm not trying to scare people, but it's just an interesting way to look at what we're told and what is.
Do you know what I think it is? Those anomalies that you're saying there about it's too big and it's too this and too precise. I think that is a clear example of us not understanding the way physics is working.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Because black holes can't exist.
Yeah,
they cannot exist, but they do.
Yep.
Because we have got the physics wrong. Because we're so smart. We think we've got. Well, we are. Aren't we?
Right.
We're so
we are
smart.
right.
We think we've got it taped, and we haven't got a clue.
Right.
We haven't got a clue. We'll find out, but we haven't got a clue.
Exactly. I mean,
the last guy who knew what he was talking about was Tesla, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What a brain!
You want to understand the universe, think resonance and vibration.
Yeah.
That's an energy. Those are the three things, and we're going to talk about that on the Truth Mongers eventually.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're going to talk about next week. I was thinking maybe we could talk about, we can talk about resonance, but I thought maybe we talk about giants since we've already been on that track. I got a really interesting book here. This came up, I actually found this at a garage sale called Giants and Gods of the Lost Races. Yeah, I couldn't believe I found it.
David and Goliath, isn't it? It's one of those kind of things.
Right. And it talks about, I talked to you a little bit about the mound builders in America.
Mm-hmm.
In my family, my mother's family were Potawatomi. And my grandfather was about 7 feet tall-ish. I'm the runt. I'm 5'10". But they found a ton of different graves back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Documented everything. Give it to the Smithsonian, came in, took them. They've been since, if they didn't disappear, they've been given back to the Native American groups now because they were Native American. Fascinating stuff, though. Really fascinating. So, and they talk about the, you and I think we're on the same page when it comes to giants and ancient structures and, what we're told and what we're not told about that. And I think it's not just having a genetic disorder. I think that there was actually beings that were here that were a hell of a lot bigger than we were, and it was by design. And that's my theory, but we can talk about that in the future. But at least you guys get an idea of the hollow moon version of what I thought. I don't have a hollow head, that's for sure. I've just come up with I'm repeating these conspiracies that were presented, so hopefully it was interesting.
That's interesting what Donna says there.
It is. And you know what? The other thing is too, is if you want something done right, have a woman design it or have a woman do it, because I bet you that astronaut would probably have a head if it was designed by a woman. Yeah. I mean, just, I don't know. Maybe he knew something about the moon, though. Maybe they took him out.
I think they could have just shot him, couldn't they, or something, or disappeared.
Wow.
And, you know.
So yeah, I don't know where we're at right now. What time is it? That's about 8:35. We did pretty good on that. Not too bad, about an hour and a half. What else do you want to add? Do you want to give props again to the all the people that were associated with the missions and that? How many people died on the
9.
9?
Yeah, there's Ted Freeman, a couple of guys on Gemini 8 Prime crew, Ed White, Roger Chaffee, Gus Grissom, Clifton Williams, and another guy. I can't remember his name, but he when I went to NASA, you know, have you been to NASA in Florida?
Mm-hmm.
Have you been there?
Yeah, oh yeah, I have. Yep.
Well, you know the big board where they shine through and put their names on the sky.
Oh yeah, yep.
Well, this guy's Ed Givens. He isn't on there, so when I was there, I made an inquiry as to why he wasn't there, and saying I think he should be, and they told me that he wasn't on. How can I put it? All the other guys died when they were either flying or training. He died coming home from a party and crashed his car. He wasn't.
So he wasn't in mission. He was.
No,
yeah.
That's right. So I said I think that's terrible, because he was slated for Apollo 15.
Yeah.
So he had a mission. Yeah, because he was driving his car, it didn't count. And I said, well, I think you should put him on. I don't know whether they have or not. I've not been for a while, but
well, it was good of you to put your foot down a little bit. I mean, it's important to their families, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I think it's sad that they lost their lives in any case before they reached their. One of the things I remember my mom and my dad telling me about the. I forget which Apollo it was, but when the men that burned to death, the 30 seconds that you were talking about,
Apollo 1.
So my parents are telling me about how horrible it was because they played the tapes. Right when I don't know if they cut that and they didn't do it again after it happened one time by accident or something. And it was horrific. It was just absolutely devastating. My mother talked about that. And this was 30 years afterward. I mean, she still told me about it. She said it must have just been unbelievable. The longest minute of, their lives. It must have just been horrific. And
they found it was not good that they died. But it was good that something happened, because that capsule, that Apollo, that mission, they were doing what was called a full-up mission simulation. So they were actually sitting on the Saturn 4B rocket, which was fueled, ready for their flight in 2 weeks' time, or 2 or 3 weeks' time. Yeah. And they were doing a full-up training session. So they were all suited up. They were in the capsule, and they were in 100% oxygen environment.
Yeah. I mean, it was
because that's lighter.
Yeah.
You start mixing nitrogen and Earth atmosphere, it gets heavier, and it's all about payload, as you know. It's all about money and fuel burning to get that extra weight. Because the reason the Saturn V rocket is so big is because it needs half that fuel to lift itself.
Yeah.
Right. So they were sitting on the Saturn 4B rocket, which is the smaller one without the third stage, because the third stage is basically to send them to the moon with the lunar module on it. So they were only doing an Earth orbit. They would have only done an Earth orbit test of the command and service module. So they were in a full-up simulation. So they were in the capsule on top of the rocket with all the fuel on, tactical nuclear bomb, right? Mm-hmm. And they found, after the fire, I'll tell you, it was 3,000 degrees inside that capsule. It cracked.
I'm sure.
The shell of the capsule cracked. Half the engineers, I don't blame them, half the engineers just got out of the gantry because it was sitting on the fuel. They thought it was going to go blow up. They would have all been just dissolved. And anyway, they found, I think it was 230 faults inside the command module to do with wiring and all that kind of thing. So what happened was there was a wiring spark.
Yeah, ignited the whole.
Pure
yeah.
oxygen atmosphere. It just went. Woof, it was just a fireball. Just a fireball, and they couldn't get the door. They changed the door because the door on the capsule on the block one, called block one capsule, you had to, they're sitting at 3 in a row.
Yeah.
What they had to do, what happens is when they go into orbit, they take the middle seat out so they can move around, and then they take the 2 side seats out. They're all sitting in a row.
Yep.
So what they had to do, imagine this, right? It's a pure oxygen atmosphere. There's a fire because they shout fire in the cockpit, and then they're screaming and all that. But what they had to do was Ed White had to get out the center seat, take the seat, collapse the seat to get to the door, which had a wrench thing on it. They had no chance. So the door was redesigned to open out on a single click.
Yeah,
and it opened. And the reasoning for that, why it worked, the astronauts insisted on that, and that what that does as well, because the door opens out when you're in orbit, you can't open the door accidentally because of the pressure.
Yeah, on the inside.
On the inside, against the vacuum, it won't move. So it did 2 things. The new door, because if it opened in, you can open it, but that wasn't tested because they changed the capsule. It took them 2 years, near enough 2 years to redesign the whole thing again. And Frank Borman of Apollo 8, one of the first men around the moon, or whatever it is, he was on the design. He was an astronaut. He knew what he was talking about. He was a pilot. Because the scientists and engineers don't listen to the pilots, you see.
Right. Well, of course not. I mean,
because
look what happened to the Russian one.
Yeah, because on Mercury they didn't want the engineers didn't want a window in it, and there was a bit of a mutiny with Shepard and the Mercury 7. They said, well, you're not putting a window in it. We're not going to sit on it. We're not going to do this and not be able to see out the window. So they put a window in it.
So, man, you're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this. That's amazing. So what do you think then, when it's all said and done, 1972, they don't go back to the moon? Why? What do you think happened? What's your take on it?
I think, like I said, the Apollo 18, 19, and 20, which had crews in training in 1969, were cancelled. And I think it was just political will. And it was also the Nixon administration wanting to stop the Kennedy idea. I think that came into it because Nixon was paranoid about Kennedy, as you probably know.
Yeah, yeah.
And it should have been, it would never have been JFK because you do only do 2 terms. So it should have been Bobby Kennedy, who was the president at that time, and would have been, I think, until he was obviously killed. Right. And but I think it was partly the Vietnam War, which almost bankrupted the United States. $300 billion over 10 years.
Sure.
25 for the space missions. Bobby Kennedy if Bobby Kennedy would have been president, one of the things he was going to do was more or less shut down the Apollo and share it with the Russians, share the cost with the Soviets, which is a good idea, really. Yeah. It is. But I think so. What happened at the end of 1972 was that the political will wasn't there, the money wasn't there, but the desire was. But desire is desire. There was no money to do it, and there was no reason to do it because they'd done it 6 times. Okay. And that's it. That's what I think. I think it's as simple as that. Because, like I said, Charlie Duke said to me that if the will would have been there and the money, he would have been on Mars. Yeah. That would have been only 13 years after he flew to the moon.
Okay, I'll give you that in that viewpoint. I think they've been going to other places. I think that there's been other things that they've been doing, and I think that we're probably seeing a lot of the military complex ships. I mean, I think or drones or whatever. I think that could be it too. If they are aliens, fine, whatever. And
I also read something years ago that I don't know whether it's true. I'm not saying I believe it, but it spoke of America being on the moon in 1958.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, hearing Buzz Aldrin talk about Mars, I mean, I've also heard other things, and this is speculation, but I've heard them talk about them being insiders that talk about propulsion technology that they've been able to get to Mars within a 90-minute shot, or excuse
90
me,
minutes?
the moon in 90 minutes. They've got the technology to get to the moon and back, or to the moon in 90 minutes and 90 minutes back. They've talked about that. I've heard, this has been things I've read in different science
That's
journals, and it's amazing if it's true.
That's
100,000
miles an hour.
Well, I mean, again, I don't know what the technology. I have no idea what they're using. The propulsion, it might not be fuel, might not be jet fuel, or whatever, rocket fuel.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of things that we don't even know, and I'm sure that they're more advanced, and they're kept quiet for a reason. I mean, but I think that eventually, we're going to find out what was there, what's around us eventually. But anyway, hopefully this show is a little bit interesting for people. It's fascinating that you know all about these astronauts. I had no idea that there were that many involved, and I'm very sorry to hear that they lost their lives in that manner. But
yeah, the worst one, obviously. I mean, they all died, so it's bad for their families. But the worst one was the fire, I think. Yeah, that must have. I mean, I remember it happening. I was 12 when that happened, and it was. I thought that was the end of it at the time. I thought, because they were saying that it might get cancelled. They were lobbying to.
Well, it's like it's when the Columbia went up when I was a kid. I mean, it was. I mean, we were watching it in high school. I was watching it my freshman year.
Wow!
Couldn't believe it. I mean, we were all there, and it was unbelievable.
Do you know they were all alive before they hit the water?
Yeah. And we didn't know that. We didn't know that till much later, but right. That just made it even worse. But
do you know what they did? This I was saying to you before about Ted Freeman veering to miss the town, and how sort of brave they are.
Yeah.
When you're on the space shuttle and you sit in two, it's two, back.
Yeah. Yep.
And so two astronauts are directly behind the pilot and the commander. And there's an egg rest system that can eject the seats.
Yep.
But there's a procedure for this. And that procedure is on the back of the seat. So if you're in the seat, you can't access it, but the guy behind can. And Judy Resnick, who was on the flight, and I think it was Onizuka, Ellison Onizuka, they, after the explosion, and the reason as the capsule came down, the man part came down, they activated the guy in front's egg rest system before they passed out.
Yeah.
So even then, they were doing what they do. They were. You understand what I mean? Their training kicked in.
Sure.
These people are remarkable. I mean, that's why they go. I've nothing but admiration for these people. They are fantastic individuals.
And that's why I'm cautious about when we bring up the conspiracy theories, because I don't want to shadow that sacrifice that they made, because that's when I look at all the rest of that garbage that we were just talking about and all the other what ifs, that's the real humanity and the loss that we've seen striving to better our species and our
one of the arguments about the moon being a false thing is the depth of the craters.
Oh, good point.
The depth of the craters are never more than sort of 1,200 feet or something, and they people bring the issue up as to why with them being impact craters. Most of them are impact craters. You can tell when it's an impact crater because it has a central peak.
Yep.
All the flat ones, they're volcanic.
Yeah,
that's all lava that's burst out and settled. But when they have a central peak like Little Mountain, that's an impact. That's whatever's hit it. And none of these things are more than 1,200 or 1,500 feet deep, even the big craters. But that you might know about this being an architect, you might have to consider this. But the reason that the Everest is, I say, only 5 miles high, is because even though the subcontinent, India is pushing it up because the Asian tectonic plate is pushing against European or whatever it is, it's pushing it up. It can't ever be 900 feet high, and that's to do with the curvature of the Earth,
Right.
crust, the mantle and the crust and all that kind of stuff. So
And gravity. Yeah. I mean, all
in gravity. So the reason that the crater never more than say 1,500 feet is because of the same thing, because the moon's smaller, so that it's the curvature is tighter, and the gravity is less, and all this kind of thing. So that's the reason.
Well, and there's no atmosphere. I mean, if it was atmospheric, there would be air that would be, it would carry on. Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors, and that to say that they're all the same depth because it's a starship or what, however they worded it, that's fine. Okay, I can get that science fiction look at it, but I'm interested in closing. I'm really interested about China and where they landed. And I know that they were talking about looking for helium-3.
Yeah.
And helium-3 is used in fusion reactors, is what I'm understanding, and it's not very readily available here.
That's right.
And again, I think that they're losing the mark. I think that the sun's is the biggest fusion reactor we've got. I don't know why we want to recreate it, but whatever.
It's because it's easier to harness because it impacts the soil, and the soil is mineable.
I see.
I read somewhere that if you could take the top, I think it was the top 2 millimeters off the entire moon, which obviously you wouldn't do, but just go with it. It would, and then you got it in the reactor, and you harness the energy from it. You could light the world up, all the world up for free for 100,000 years.
Wow.
Which is what Tesla was doing with his everlasting light bulb and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But you don't make money on that.
Well, that's just it. I mean, they're staking their claim now, which they have every right to. I mean, if they've got a system that's going to work, but it's, again, we're back to the capitalistic mindset. Well, if they keep digging, if they do 2 meters, they're going to end up finding some aliens eventually. They keep digging. It's a hollow moon.
Alien skeletons 20 foot high.
Or some skylights. Maybe they'll find the skylights.
The film a couple of years ago that was about Neil Armstrong. There was a film out, wasn't there? There was a guy, I can't remember the guy's name, but he played the guy. It was the guy who was Neil Armstrong. Is that Canadian guy who played in Blade Runner 2049 or whatever it's called?
Oh yeah,
it's that guy. Anyway,
Gosling, right? Ryan Gosling, right? Isn't that his name?
I don't know. Anyway, he I've not seen that film, but I understand there was a lot of controversy about it because they didn't show Neil Armstrong putting the flag up because they didn't want to upset anybody. Well, he did.
He did, though.
He did. We saw it. They all did. There are 6 of them there. There's only the Apollo 11 flag was blown down when they took off. You can see that.
Yeah, right. You can see it. Yeah.
But the other 5 knew this, so they put theirs further away, and those are still there. Those are still flying.
Right.
But they probably blank now because the solar winds knocked the color out.
Got it. All right, cool. I appreciate you stopping in, man, and giving your
input. It's been good, yeah.
I'm glad that everybody, I can't believe 2 hours flies by for us here, right? I hope it does for you guys too. I know we ramble a little bit, but it's such a fascinating discussion when we get going here. One thing I do want to do before we leave is we do have one other sponsorship that we want to talk about is the Rapa Nui promo book. So let's look about that author Glenn B. Fleming has put out, and we'll be right back.
Rapa Nui, A Personal Journey, is an absorbing look through the eyes of one man's realization of his lifetime dream to visit the remotest inhabited place on Earth, Rapa Nui. The island is born of the most violent volcanic activity in the South Pacific, and its history is almost as violent as its fiery formation. Glenn Fleming's fascination with Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, began in his school days. Further research fueled Glenn's determination to visit and document the island for himself, and you can feel his enthusiasm throughout the book. From his outward journey and his experiences of the island to almost meeting his demise on the deadly terrain by brutal, unforgiving waves and at the hands of a jealous local, Glenn shares his relationship with us of this mysterious land. In addition to a diary of his daily personal experiences, Glenn compiles tales of Rapa Nui myth, legend and folklore. He contrasts these stories with tales of first-hand historical accounts, particularly those of the 18th century English mariner Captain James Cook, and more recently the Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl. We learn about the ancient civil war between the long ears and the short ears, about the Tangata Manu tribe, who may have practiced cannibalism, the Birdman tribe, and other bizarre, deadly rituals. The spectacular photographs and illustrations by the author portray the imposing sentinels known as Moai, glorious sunsets, and the ever-present Pacific Ocean. The greatest value of this book rests firmly on historical, sociological, political, and anthropological levels. It is a perfect piece to compare with Shakespeare's The Tempest, reflecting a unique culture systematically and forcefully changed by influences from the outside world, giving us a sobering look at human nature. The book is now available on Amazon.
I'll have to read that.
It's the pictures alone are worth it.
Pictures are amazing.
Yeah. And I need to review that too. I need to put a review up for you because I know that
I took 1,000 photographs while I was there and 6 hours of film.
Incredible. And this was back in the 90s, right?
No, this was 2005.
Or sorry, 2000. I meant 2000s. Sorry.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, in true form, I just want to make sure we give you props because you are and including the other books that you were talking about tonight. You need to look at everything that Glenn's doing because he's a wealth of knowledge and he spent a lot of years writing a lot of words and tell some really good stories when it comes down to it. People wouldn't know about it. I wouldn't know about the history of the astronauts. And it's interesting that you do it from across the pond. So, and I think that's even better. That's even better.
I've always, people think on Facebook, people think I'm an American anyway. A lot of people do, yeah. Cool. And it's the second best place on earth.
That's right. Well, having said that, I appreciate everybody stopping in tonight. Let me see what last we have a few more comments here. Carl says, yeah, with fantastic photos. He said he will definitely tell you about. He owns the Rapa Nui book, I know.
Yeah,
and he's been reading it as we all have as we got that. So, yeah. So next week, I think we're going to work on giants.
Yeah.
We will talk about that and the history of the different civilizations of giants that we have had on the earth. I think that'll be a really good one, both biblically and
the staircase off the coast of Japan.
Yeah, I definitely want to see that. I want to see that up close. I'm not a big fan of deep water, but man,
but I think those guys were bigger than 20 foot.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I was telling you about Michael Tellinger in South Africa, what he was talking about, and I'm gonna blow your mind on that one next week and how tall those guys were. He's talking, we were the size of locusts compared to these giants. That's how huge they were. So, but we'll talk more about that. So, and I'll get the title package and all that stuff together this weekend, hopefully. So, thanks so much for stopping in, Glenn. Always good seeing you, man. And stick around. We'll talk after the show. Thanks again, guys. Have a great week. Find some conspiracies. Let us know what you guys think, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for stopping in.